before the editorial was published, Ida left Memphis for a long-planned trip to Philadelphia and New York. As many of you probably know from the story, when she arrives in New York, she was told that she cannot go back to the South. She will not go back for 10 years. Their newspaper office has been destroyed. The co-owner has been run out of town with the threat of lynching and castration, and that people are also threatening to lynch her. That lights are now at the railway depot waiting for her to return, threatening her with lynching and cutting up her face. Exiled in New York, she wrote one of the most important political documents, I think, in our history, the New York Age, published by T. Thomas Fortune, the most important black publisher of the period. It was called The Truth About Lynching editorial. It was later published as a pamphlet, as the first comprehensive study of lynching published. Now, Martin Wells, as I mentioned before, was not the first to protest lynching, which is a practice that really began during the Revolutionary War years. But she was the first to create a national and international campaign against it. She made lynching a national crime, but because of her, it becomes at the center of the civil rights agenda. Because of her, U.S. presidents have to talk about it, especially Republicans, if they want the black to vote. State officials have to acknowledge it eventually. In fact, anti-lynching legislation passed in a number of southern states. It was sort of not real, it was done for PR purposes. But at least she forced the attention to lynching when it was ignored before. And in looking at all of her contemporaries in that period, Wells seems at least to me to appear to be the only one who really understands in depth what the lynching phenomenon means in a modern era of technological innovations. Of course, the modern social disappeared in the 1880s, early 1880s, the emergence of the modern social sciences. There's an evangelical movement going on in this period of time. Of course, it's the industrial age of modernity, and she understands now, I think the only one who understands this relationship of all that to lynching. Of course, in the Reconstruction years, they had been lynching right after the Civil War. But that seemed to be really much about blacks in the vote, keeping blacks from voting. By the 1880s, which is the first period when the number of blacks lynched exceed the number of whites lynched. 1886 is that first year it happens. Blacks are not really voting very much in the South. The Confederate states have taken over. We've taken over this South again. The former Confederates have taken over the South state governments again. And it's tremendous black progress. When you begin to read what blacks have been able to do, just one generation removed from slavery. It's quite incredible. There are black businesses, certainly black churches. I found that public school attendance, black public school attendance in Memphis exceeded that of white public school attendance. And so people are thinking about what is happening. And in fact, Wells in the beginning, as we maybe yourself, and that's what I want to explore with you today, of why and how she comes to sort of understand what's going on. And also why her campaign, despite it sort of seems its obvious importance and significance, why it's controversial, even among African Americans in many ways. And so, while I'm learning this, I was trying to understand this. And let me just sort of talk a little bit about that with you. I began to understand and how in some instances, and certainly true with Wells, how she had to break with that culture in order to create a modern civil rights campaign. In fact, I would argue that her anti-lynching campaign is really one of the origins of the modern civil rights campaign we saw in the 60s and 70s. of course, this is another thing, as I mentioned, that we don't often talk about in terms of blacks being part of the progressive era. We also don't think about African Americans, particularly in the South in the late 19th century, of how Victorian they were, and how imbued with the Victorian culture that they were. And I'm not just talking about elites who went to liberal arts schools and burned and read Victorian literature. I'm talking about a convention, a way of behavior, and certain kinds of values that blacks, including Wells, who, after all, is what our slaves shared. And as I mentioned today in the now, because you have to have a certain kind of morality in order to achieve in relation to wealth, etc., etc. Certain kind of morality, a certain kind of behavior to be productive. And you really begin to see all of these Victorian values that she has. Her obsession with order, her efforts to keep these baser emotions at bay through moral discipline and the highest forms of cultural expression. She has a very essentialist views and dichotomous views of good and bad, like Victorians, and pure and corrupt, and behavior which distinguishes the upper from the lower classes. She certainly believes in the accumulation of wealth for going immediate gratification. She longed to write with the refinement of a lady of culture, and thus elevate and inspire her readers in the kind of Victorian ideal. And namely, much of her, as you see, anger within her. She calls it, she's very self-aware, and you can see it, her struggle, but she calls it her besetting sin. And of course, anger and expression of anger is very ladylike in this period in the culture. It is really very, very important in the past. And especially since gender has particular connotations around not just womanhood per se and manhood per se, but also about citizenship, about integrity of one's self. And that gender differences between men and women are very important in terms of the humanity of one. So blacks are also trying to deal with all of these issues while dealing in the South. Wells, despite all of her intensity, really admires these kind of soft, kind of feminine women. You know, she says in her diary, she talks about a colleague in her diary who's good, kind, and soft as a mouse. You know, I love that, you know, when you begin to really look at the distance she comes to be able to handle this campaign, it is quite extraordinary. Wells also believes in this cavalier myth of the South, as many blacks do. This kind of idea of that we've had kind of that the South had an aristocratic culture that embodied traits of order and stability, cohesion. It becomes a really myth in this period, and for slander in this system. And Wells writes, "It seems awful to take a human life, but hardly more so than to take a woman's reputation and make it the jest and byword on the street. In view of these things, one is strongly tempted to say that this killing was justifiable." This is a tough, this is tough. So you can see now, perhaps, as she says in her autobiography, that at first she didn't understand what was going on with these lynchings. That at first she sort of had adopted what was meant to be conveyed by whites, that blacks were attacking white women. And she wasn't sure, but she said, you know, in that autobiography, she said, but if it's true, and even though I don't like the idea of the sort of, that this goes against law and order lynching, which is mob law, she said, if this is true, though, she said, you know, we can understand why the many of us feel why the brute deserves it such a way. And so I think of something by like Wells, and she says Frederick Douglass had the same sort of idea. So we can begin to see why people are kind of slow to grasp things. Also remember, this is a period of great urbanization in the South, and people are leaving their rural areas for the cities.
And the cities are becoming very disorderly, something Victorians just can't have a hard time dealing with. And it's now organized crime, organized prostitution, the things that people haven't seen before on a scale people haven't seen before. Du Bois talked about bad niggas coming into the cities that are harmful to everyone in this period of time. Booker T. Washington will always say, he would later become Ida's nemesis about lynching. He would say, well, you know, no graduate of Tuskegee was ever lynched. So there was also this class kind of idea of who was getting lynched and who wasn't. Very quickly, some other things that kind of, this class notion among blacks also. So many people thought that it's just the lower classes that are involved in this violence. It's not the upper class. The Christian Index, a black religious magazine in 1892 said, quote, the sum of both races which meet, drink, gamble, and propagate corruption. It's the sum of both races which meet, drink, gamble, and propagate corruption. The Negro is always kindly treated by the intelligent white people, but meets his bitterest enemy among the lower classes of the race. End quote. And you'll read, when you read the black newspapers, you'll see that there's lots of activity of sometimes blacks trying to get upper class whites to get lower class, to elevate lower class whites around issues of discrimination because of this class idea. Another thing, a couple other things very quickly. I believe you read the newspapers that racism would finally dissipate and go away once people understood and there was greater knowledge and greater progress. And blacks were actually, as I mentioned, more succeeded. There was this kind of evangelical certainty about human progress, that there was always a constant and always up. And then blacks just had the right, they had the citizenship rights. Were educated and accumulated wealth and acted properly, then racism would disappear. So there was kind of an anti-protest idea going on, an anti-political aspect of it. And remember, this is a period when people are fearful of people's emotions and passion. This is the period when Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is published. And that story of Dr. Jekyll who lets the animal within him, Mr. Hyde, sort of marries to do things he's not supposed to do, but he can't get Mr. Hyde back in the body. And finally has to commit suicide. So this is when T. Thomas Clifton first proposes the first black national organization for the national Afro-American. Calvin Chase, who's also American, and another newspaper editor, he said, we can't have an organization like that. It would result in, quote, a national Negro mob that would get the Negroes in the South together. And finally, let me just, one other really important aspect that kind of denotes the difficulty kind of climbing this hill to get to the picture, to get to what really going on about lynching, is this Victorian concept of a culture based on what Daniel Joseph Singer called radical innocence, which I love to that innocence was a cultural goal of the Victorians. Americans have found describes the purity of them, and they can accommodate with such a presence of conflict or evil. Young struggles with this, personally, this idea, as well as unfortunately struggles with it politically. And she can accommodate with evil within herself. If you look at how it is to not always successfully. When a boyfriend is born, a whole exactly on his love life, But it's really interesting. I thought Charles was he's very attractive, he's kind. He's kind. He's got funky hair. He's attractive. He's really got acres if you can imagine. And interesting. I think he's just attractive. Yeah. You know, she has moments, she has boyfriends, and not just this is a thing that people are writing that they write letters, and she has boyfriends in other parts of the country. But that's a whole nother, don't get me started on that, so it's really, really interesting. But one of these boyfriends is working on. And listen to this title in this song. I know it is unchristian-like to burn for revenge, as I do. But a demon is tempting me to lead him on and choose him at last. When I think of how I could and can fool him, and of his weak imaginings to the contrary, heavy evidences of spiteness, and he has been faithful to because I would not stoop to deceit, I go wild and determined to pay him back. And then she started to pull herself from the ring. I will do the right as I know it, because it is right. I have never stooped to underhanded measures to accomplish my aim. I will not begin with late dates by doing what my soul abhors. Figuring men used to seek for people with flattery to whom an escort is gratified them. And I earnestly pray my Father to show me the right, to give me the strength to do it, because it is right. What you kind of arms yourself when you come to an innocent something. I shall pray for this disease, he's talking about. And all others who have formed themselves in need against the constant prayer, that they may see the light that stun me, and on me bear easily. Her God is full of himself. And is self-conscious idea. Now, but there are some things that